Recently, an aunt of mine passed away. To my surprise, she left me a cabin near a local national forest, something that has been passed down throughout our family, kept in good repair, but rarely used. I found a large chest full of journals and letters. It's obvious that all the writing is fiction. None of the events described in these pages ever happened. They could not have happened. But there's something about this collection of unsettling documents, the way they're written, perhaps, that makes the nonsense that they contain convincing. That's why I'm sharing one of the journals here. Maybe someone can help me understand it, or simply be amused. Maybe someone will finally convince me that it isn't real. The Wanderers by Late Stage Infernalism. January 2nd, 1866. The war has finally ended. It was truly over as soon as the first rising, of course, but the men in their suits chose today to acknowledge the truth. The Confederates have returned to the fold as meekly as you please. They have agreed to free all the slaves, those that were left in any case. We haven't heard any news since arriving here, of course, but I remembered the last newspaper I had read. January 2nd was the day of reunion, declared by Congress. I have no idea if there's anyone left alive in the capital to celebrate it, or indeed to rule over the remnants of our once great republic. James and I are Unitarians. We were each abolitionists before we met, but even the worst plantation owner must now admit that all men are equal. The creeping death makes it apparent, and the things it makes of us, one cannot tell the land of their origin anymore. Not even when they are close enough for you to smell the rot on their breath, as I have been once. First it kills, then it changes. The scientific men say that it is simply a new disease that galvanizes the dead, granting them an insane unlife. Anyone who has witnessed one of them knows that they are no longer human at all. One of the wanderers could have been an enemy or a friend, your lover, or even your mother. Doesn't matter. They are never recognizable. James has killed 17 of them just to get us here. I do not remind him of this, as we both know that they were once human, and I don't wish to cause him distress. Inside, I'm pleased, because he has kept us both alive more times than I can count, before and since the first snow. I've killed 2, but one was direly injured before I finished it with a heavy flat iron. The other I shot with James's revolver. James has seen fit to scavenge me a repeating rifle from one of the bodies that we've come across. He cleaned and oiled it and gathered ammunition as well. It was as fine an anniversary gift as can be expected under the circumstances. We left before the great dying had already started. But at that time, it seemed like any other outbreak. It was enough to stop the slaughter of the war, however. Men can't fight when they're that sick. Death called a ceasefire where the generals were unable to. We were already headed west, which probably saved us. We were in the Ohio River Valley when things began to change. We both sensed it. Some of those who were traveling stopped at Cincinnati because they felt the city would be better defended. This was understandable, but James and I barely exchanged a glance before we knew that this would not be our destination. We carried on west. We got more news in Indiana. New York and Atlanta had both fallen, although no one could say exactly to what. The telegraphs went down after that. Soldiers were recalled to defend the cities. Only a few of us were continuing west past Chicago, a mere trickle. The autumn came late, which was a blessing, allowing us to put distance between us and the doomed east. The creeping death caught up to us in Davenport, or perhaps it passed us. It is hard to say. It does not behave as a pestilence should. Camp McClellan stood on the riverside after we were ferried across with a military escort. Infantry and cavalry were going back and forth. The fort was secure and guarded, but the city was not. Davenport is where we saw our first wanderers. James could not stop me from climbing the ramparts with him where we observed them. A kindly man, an old sergeant, pointed them out, showed us how they moved and stumbled. Even in the shadows of the late afternoon, we could see how elongated their head and limbs were, how their fingers ended in bones protruding through withered pale flesh. "You should watch, sir," he said to James, "but the little lady may not want to," he added, for propriety's sake. Again, James knew better than to attempt to dissuade me. A man, an actual man, was out amongst the buildings. He was apparently a deserter, uniform worn and ragged, condemned to death should he be found by the living or the dead. He was close to the wanderer, but had yet to round the other side of the burned-out brick building. The wanderer stopped in its directionless lurch, having heard the deserter. It crouched and tightened into a ball. It was perhaps 10 strides from the corner. As soon as the deserter exposed himself, it sprung. I am not ashamed to say that I choked away a scream and clutched at James's hand. The thing did not even move like a human, or a cat, or any other thing that God made to walk this earth. Soon the wanderer was tearing the deserter apart, rendering him limb from limb. Most distressingly, the thing did not attempt to consume his corpse, but simply left it there to rot. I understand now why some believe that the time of revelations is upon us. We left Davenport the next day, moving south with a caravan of soldiers before cutting out west on our own. We could not have stayed in any case. They did not have enough supplies for the refugees that were already there, and we do not wish to starve. We traveled for weeks after, and only found the cabin at the end of the fall. We were lucky. There were a few supplies and tools left in it, but it seemed clear that the occupants left and did not intend to return. So James and I made it our own. While I am warm and safe inside writing this, without him I feel hollow. He left on a quick hunting and scouting trip, attempting to see what was occurring to the north, where a settlement once was. I did not approve of this trip, but he is stubborn like me, and I could not dissuade him, as I am safe as one can be here, so I keep the home fires burning and await his return. Does he know, I wonder? Should I have told him? Or would that have brought him needless worry on his journey? With luck, I will tell him soon, for he is due back tonight. January 5th, 1866, morning. Nothing new has happened. I debated even writing this entry, but part of that nothing is that James has not returned. As of today, he's 3 days late, and I must consider the worst. I have no choice now. I want to weep, but I'm too tired. Still, I'm grateful. Thanks to the tools and storage left behind and his insistence on scavenging from homes of the fallen as we traveled, we've managed to procure a stock of oats, coffee, salted pork and fish, and even some dried apricots. A lucky find. In my isolation, I regret splitting off from the families we traveled with for a week or so. I miss the sounds of their children still playing happily around the campfire. Still, they went south while we chose to go west. Everyone has their own ideas of where safety might lie, but no one has proof. We are all on an uncertain pilgrimage, January 5th, 1866 afternoon. I was making a long journey to a field with much dead and dry wood, partially to preserve the supply of cutwood near the cabin and partly just for something to do. I was on my way back, perhaps a half a mile from home, when I saw the woman. I dropped the load of firewood I carried and unslung the rifle, but even at 200 yards I could tell she was still human. I hate myself for being so cautious now. As she darted back into the woods, she may have been a native, I do not know. I wept when I returned home. How I would have just liked an hour of conversation, even if we don't share a language. Even just sitting together would have been a blessing. I've decided to leave a small basket outside filled with some dried goods, things that can stand the cold. I have enough to share, for now, and I do not want her or anyone else to think I am truly hostile. January 6, 1866. I shall never meet the woman I saw, but I am grateful for her passing. The basket was taken, which pleased me. Left there was a crudely scrawled note in charcoal on a faded piece of newspaper. Many more to east. They're coming. Be safe. I did not welcome the news, but I took heed of the warning. James and I had discussed the possibility. We have not seen many outside of centers of habitation, but if those who died and resurrected as wanderers ran out of prey that they so hate, would they not leave in search of more? So, tonight will be dangerous. I cannot run, not only because I do not wish to abandon the hope of James returning, but also because I have no shelter to the west. God be with me. January 7th, 1866. Many turned out to be quite a few, but nowhere near the number we saw when we lit out of Davenport. I put out the fire and covered the windows with blankets, both to avoid being seen and to keep the heat within. I wrapped myself up as much as possible and went to bed early, knowing that I might not be able to last the entire night. I woke up at midnight, the cold almost stabbing in its ferocity. I was debating restarting the fire. That's when I heard the first scratches at the closed shutters. One could have thought them animals, raccoons perhaps. But then there was more scratching at the door and the shutter across the cabin. And finally, even the roof. When the sun rose, the scratching stopped. But then it got worse. A great moan ushered from outside. Not just one voice, but perhaps a dozen, all at once. Choir of loathsome demons. I shivered, terrified, but I did not move. I stayed still. That is why I believe I am alive. Perhaps after a half hour, when I thought I would finally go mad, the moaning ceased. I heard them walk away in their uncertain stride. Still, I remembered what I had said to James before he left. Remembered that they are clever and patient, in the way that wolves can be. I waited perhaps another hour. All was silent outside. Then, with a deep, angry moan, the very last wanderer gave up its vigil outside my door and lopped off into the woods to the west. They are all gone. I'm sure they could have broken in, had they wanted to. Perhaps they did not sense me, or perhaps they feared me. I do not understand their behavior, but then I suppose that no one truly does. It's January 8th, 1866. I'm alive, I'm fed, and I'm warm. Still, my husband has not returned. I'm with child. Oh Lord, what shall I do? January 13th, 1866. 5 days of nothing but routine. I found my knitting chest and began to work on clothes for the baby, as I could not think of anything else to do at the moment. I would give much for a book or a conversation, but that's not why I write. I had a dream last night, or so I hope it was. I slept as normal, James's rifle by my head, shutters closed, fire low. I woke to scratching. It was similar to that of the wanderers from outside, but subtle and almost silent. As I watched in horror, a dim thread of moonlight snuck in between the shutters. A single hideous claw of bone was sliding up between them, unlatching them, then pushing them open. The thing crept in slowly, moving as a spider, not to the floor but to the wall. I was ready to strike. I had the rifle loaded. I knew that I could kill it, but I did not. I feared that there were more outside and hoped that it would leave on its own, not sensing me beneath my mound of blankets. The thing dropped from the wall, and now it was far too close to me. I could not see it without turning my head, so I waited for a moment, then spun and took aim. I realized then that the silhouette was familiar. The thing may have been stark white with impossibly large eyes, but wore my beloved's hat and cloak. It was James. I'm sure of it. I was afraid of him, and he knew it. He moved jerkily, but did not behave as one of them did. He smiled, attempting to reassure me. His mouth was but a rotten hole, and his teeth, dear God, they were so long and unevenly sharp, serrated and yellow. His tongue lolled madly, as if it had a mind of its own. I saw that he would not kill me, but part of me wished that he would. I feared his mercy almost more than his fangs. I did not understand until I heard the moan. It was clear but also strangely soft and muffled. That which was once James did not make a sound. I was sure of that. I was terrified. Even if this thing would not hurt me, others might. I looked around as I heard it again, but of course it was not coming from behind a shutter or a wall or even roof, not this time. This time, it was coming from my own belly. In my dream, I fainted. When I woke, tangled in my blankets, the James thing was nowhere in sight, and nothing moaned or scratched in the light of day. But the shutter was still open, the light it spilled bringing no warmth. God, please let it have been but a dream. There are many books like this, handwritten in typed journals and letters, all different handwriting, all describing incredible scenarios and horrors. None could ever have happened, of that I am sure. But all seem to be legitimate. And I fear that if I sent the books to an expert, he would find them to be authentic in construction of the times that they claim to be from. I'm searching them right now to see if there are more journals from this woman, but so far I've found none. I find myself shuddering at the thought of what might have occurred after the last entry. But I also feel like I must know what happened. Strangely, I'm starting to feel that about all of these books and letters. I feel like I have to understand them. Maybe I'll read more of them to you. Maybe you can help me.